Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist-Third Worldist Collective. Let me begin by stating or admitting that this is my fifth time attempting to do this podcast, and I made mistakes each time. When I did, I stopped the podcast and began over again. I won't do that again. So from now on, with this particular podcast anyway, if I make a mistake, I will admit it, I will correct it, and go on. Because this is getting ridiculous. It is getting kind of ridiculous. The topic that I will be addressing is third campism, also called third camp socialism, also called, somewhat controversially, third camp Trotskyism. Now, why do I make mistakes? Here's why. Third campism is an extremely confusing tendency. Extremely confusing. I was a third campist, and if I get confused by it, I can only imagine how confused other people must be by it. So what I do commonly, and this is in conversations with my friends as well, as I am explaining third campism, I will mess up and I'll say, no, that's wrong. No, that's wrong. And I will stop and start again. And I did that just before. So this time I will just continue, as I said. And again, if I make a mistake, I will say, oops, sorry, that was a mistake. Let me go and start again. The reason why I do this with third campism is because third campism is very perplexing. And it's hard for me as a former third campist to make sense out of it. Even when I was a third campist, which was for about 10 years, it was hard to make sense out of it. Why I stayed a third campist for 10 years, I have no idea. I have been through a succession of communist tendencies. I started out in the New Left, then I became a Marxist, Leninist, heterodox. Then I joined a couple of other tendencies. Then I went and became a Maoist-Third Worldist under the influence of the great Jason Unruh. Then, for some reason, I left Maoism-Third Worldism and became a third campist for 10 years. Then this past June, meaning June of 2023, I went back to Maoism-Third Worldism. Thankfully, I never should have left it in the first place. But be that as it may, we cannot change the past. We can only attempt to make the future better. And that's what I am trying to do right now, especially by making these podcasts, which is a kind of recompense for the mistakes that I made in leaving Maoism-Third Worldism and becoming a third campist, but also because I enjoy it. I like doing podcasts. It's a way kind of continuing my career as a college professor, but without being paid for it. So I'm not getting paid for this, and please don't pay me because I won't take the money, but it's a way of continuing it to some extent, and talking about things that I want to talk about, not things that I would rather not talk about this subject or that subject, but hey, it's a part of the course, so I need to discuss it. That's not an issue anymore. I can talk about what I want. Okay, so what is third campism? That's a confusing question. Why did you ask that, Mark? Third campism is arguably Trotskyist. But is it really Trotskyist? I would say no. And a lot of third campists would also say no. Hal Draper, who was the guy that I looked up to mostly when I was a third campist, toward the end of his life, he stopped referring to third campism as Trotskyist, and I think he was correct. Now, you can still make an argument for calling it Trotskyist, but it needs to be a very carefully made argument. First, Trotsky is really the guy that started third campism. He wrote about it in one of his books. Now, his three camps were not exactly the same as the three camps that were started by Max Shachtman and his associates during the World War II period, but they were pretty close. They were pretty close. But still, what happened is that Trotsky, ultimately, 30 years later, rejected third campism. I guess he rejected his own idea. Now, some people have said, why did he do that? Why did he attack his own idea? Well, I mean, I look back as an almost 68-year-old man, and I think back to when I was 38, which to me was yesterday, but really was not yesterday. And I realized how differently I thought when I was 38 than how I think right now. And so changing your mind after 30 years is understandable to me. So I would not criticize Trotsky for that. There are other things I would criticize him for, but not for changing his mind. I mean, we all change our minds. That's a part of being human beings, I think. So Trotsky attacked it. He wrote in one place, and I'm paraphrasing it, if this is Trotskyist, meaning third campism, then I am no Trotskyist. That's how much he changed his mind. He really changed his mind. He no longer liked third campism at all, even though he was really the one who came up with the idea. So, during World War II, which I don't remember since I was born in February 1956, my father told me stories about it. My father fought in World War II. My father was actually in the National Guard before the war started. Then when the war started, his battalion was transferred from the National Guard into the Army. And it was not a very pleasant thing. My father told me some really harrowing experiences that he had, and he was only a medic, but he killed people as a medic. He killed Japanese people during the Second World War. I would not have been happy in that situation. But my father was actually proud of his role. My father was, unlike me, very patriotic. And so he thought of his experiences in World War II as being a display of his patriotism. And so he actually looked up to that. That was the most wonderful part of his life, was being in World War II, was being in the Army. He would constantly talk about it, even when nobody wanted to hear about it. That was his favorite topic of conversation, me in World War II. Okay. When third campism started, there were three camps. Obviously, third campism. First camp were the Allied powers. Now, the Allied powers included the US and the former Soviet Union. You couldn't think of a more unlikely pair than that, and yet they were allies during World War II. Now, the second camp were the Axis powers. That consisted of Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and militarist Japan. Those were the Axis powers. Now, there was no certainty that the Allied powers would win. In fact, at many points during World War II, a lot of people thought that we were going to lose. And I can't imagine, however bad this world is right now, under the domination of the empire of the United States, how much worse it would be under the domination of Nazi Germany. That's unimaginable to me. And yet we came close to that. That could have very easily happened. Okay, so that was the second camp, the Axis powers. The third camp, which has remained the third camp throughout the different stages of third campism, which we'll get into, consisted of the proletariat, the workers, and the subaltern, the marginalized peoples of society. That was the third camp. Now, World War II ended. Stalin wanted to have friendly relations with the West, including the US. The US turned Stalin down. So if you are ever asked, who started the Cold War? The answer is the US, or more broadly, the First World. We started it. It was not started by the Soviet Union. Clearly, it was not started by the Soviet Union. It was started by the West. Why we did not accept that invitation, I have some idea, but I'm not positive, so I'll leave that for other people to discuss. I am not a scholar on World War II history. After World War II, there was a need to reformulate the camps, and that's precisely what they did. And again, they came up with 3 camps. Why 3? I don't know. Now, the 3 camps were: first camp, the empire again, the US and its allies. Except now, the empire did not include the Soviet Union. The second camp was the Warsaw Pact, which did include the Soviet Union. And the third camp, again, was the proletariat and the subaltern. Okay, so that was the 3 camps that existed until the dissolution of the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union was under the control of Mikhail Gorbachev. A lot of people blame Gorbachev for the destruction of the Soviet Union, and there's some merit to that, but he was not solely to blame. I mean, Brezhnev, Khrushchev, I mean, they weren't great gifts to the Soviet Union either. They made a lot of mistakes as well. So really, after Stalin, the Soviet Union was not under the best leadership. So it's not surprising that basically the Soviet Union went bankrupt, which is why it fell apart. It literally could no longer compete with the United States and the empire. So the Soviet Union was gone. The Berlin Wall came down. I remember that. I remember the pictures of people tearing down the Berlin Wall, people climbing over the Berlin Wall. And the security guards, who would ordinarily have shot those people who were trying to escape into what was then called West Germany, did not shoot them. They just stood by and they let the East Germans cross over into West Germany, into West Berlin. That was really a very shocking thing for me to watch. I didn't know what to make of it. I just was amazed by watching it, because it was such a change from what I had been used to. And I think most people had that same response. No matter where in the world you lived, you saw that happening if you had a TV set. And it was truly a shocking, surprising event. Okay, so you had a new collection of 3 camps after World War II. You had the empire, the United States, and its allies. Why? Because after World War II, the US emerged as the undisputed leader of the first world, or as fans of the US would say, the free world. I would question that, but regardless, if you want to call it the free world, feel free to do so, but I will be throwing spitballs at you from behind. Whatever you want to call it, first world, the free world, the empire, that became the new first camp. The Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, was no longer a part of it. So the Soviet Union formed its own alliance, similar to NATO, which was formed by the US and its allies, called the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact became the new second camp. That's logical, right? New second camp. The third camp, once again, was the proletariat and the subaltern. Okay, so that was the situation which occurred basically after the end of World War II. You had the formulation of 3 new camps. Now, when the Soviet Union ended, as I mentioned before, there was a need to reformulate the camps again. And wouldn't you know it, once again, 3 camps. What is this obsession with 3? 3 camps. Again, 3 stages of 3 camps. Now, it's Russia and its allies, the empire, the United States and its allies, and once again, the proletariat and the subaltern. Okay, so that is basically where we are today. We are, according to third campists, in a time of 3 camps once again. In fact, we have been in a time of 3 camps, although different 3 camps, since World War II. Now, what the condition of the world was prior to World War II, I don't know. Maybe some third campists have come up with formulations before then. If so, I personally have not read it. So I can't speak about the period prior to World War II, only World War II to the present. So, all right. So now we have these new 3 camps. And the 3 camps represent, as we now have them, the current form of third campism, third camp socialism, or third camp Trotskyism. Is it appropriate to use the term Trotskyism? Not really. So some third campists refer to it as heterodox Trotskyism. The word heterodox, hetero, from the same root as heterogeneity or heterosexual. It means different, right? Different. Just like homo in Latin means same. Homosexual, homogeneous. So hetero is different. Does not mean unorthodox. They're camps that in other words, they're 2 different Trotskyisms, at least. Orthodox Trotskyism and at least 1, some would say 2, separate heterodox Trotskyisms. We won't get into the second one because that will just confuse me even more. So that is where we are right now. We are in a stage of 3 camps, which are different than the previous 2 collections of 3 camps. You see how I confused myself? That's why I confused myself, because the combination of 3 and 3 and 3 times, it's very confusing, and I mess myself up all the time when I'm trying to explain this to people. Regardless, I will try to be as careful as I can so I don't make that many mistakes. Now, the notion of heterodox Trotskyism implies that, well, Yeah, it's sort of Trotskyism, but it's not really Trotskyism because Trotsky rejected it. So it's influenced by Trotskyism, but it's not precisely the Trotskyism of Trotsky, meaning it's not Orthodox Trotskyism, whatever Orthodox Trotskyism is. And I have no idea what that means because there are multiple different organizations, each with their own viewpoints, which all claim to be Orthodox. So I don't know what Orthodox Trotskyism is. Trotskyism is a very confusing movement. And part of that is because Trotsky placed, in my opinion, much too much emphasis on correctness, on accuracy, on precision. And so if people had a slight disagreement with the Trotskyist organization they were in, very commonly they either left or were kicked out, and often would start their own new Trotskyism. But they often would say, well, no, we are the true Orthodox Trotskyists. Those other people are the deviants or whatever. So it really made no sense. It was Trotskyism is a very difficult tendency to make sense out of. It's a tendency of tendencies. Trotsky himself, I think, went too far with his notion of purity. Who cares about doctrinal purity? What matters is having a successful revolution, not whether you have the precise agreement with other people in your tendency. That's my view anyway. Okay, now, so that's where we are right now. Now, there are two major organizations which are connected with Third Campus. One is called Workers' Liberty, which has branches both in the UK and in Australia. The other is called Solidarity, which has branches in the US and in Canada. It's possible, I think, to join Solidarity even if you live elsewhere in the world. I know that you cannot join Workers' Liberty if you live at least in the US, because I tried when I was a third campist and they would not let me in, which actually at the time made me angry. I thought, why not just let me in? So ultimately, I ended up joining Solidarity, even though at the time I liked Workers' Liberty better. Now I don't like either one of them. I think they're both miserable failures. They both have totally misunderstood what Marx and Engels and everyone else who was a legitimate communist was talking about. They've twisted around what communism is. And there is a reason why there has never been a successful Trotskyist country. It's because of Trotskyism itself. Trotskyism itself has prevented the establishment of an actual Trotskyist country. Now, Trotskyists would like to have a country. They have this thing called the Fourth International, and the objective of the Fourth International is to have an international revolution leading, I guess, to a Trotskyist world, but that has been a failure too. Okay, now there are multiple Fourth Internationals, which all disagree with each other on even very basic ideas. And so I literally don't know what to make of that. Okay, now let's get back to Third Campus. Fortunately, I began to experience what we call in the social sciences cognitive dissonance concerning Third Campus. I'll explain to you what that means now. The term cognitive dissonance was coined by the social psychologist Leon Festinger, a brilliant man. If you have not read his books, I strongly recommend that you read them. One of them is actually called Cognitive Dissonance. And Cognitive dissonance exists when your beliefs and your actions do not correspond. So, for example, say I believe that cigarette smoking is bad, but I smoke 3 packs a day. Well, that's going to give me cognitive dissonance. But if I quit smoking, I will no longer have cognitive dissonance. Or if somehow I manage to talk myself into the idea that smoking is harmless, I don't know how, but somehow, then I guess I will also no longer have cognitive dissonance. So the opposite of cognitive dissonance is cognitive consonance. That's where your beliefs and your actions correspond with one another. So I began to experience tremendous cognitive dissonance with respect to third campism. I was no longer comfortable being a third campist. It was a process. It was a process which ended in June of 2023, but really it lasted for about a year, where I became less and less happy with the idea of being a third campist. For one thing, why always 3 camps? For another, what about mainland China? Why is mainland China not included as a camp? So there were a number of issues. There were others too that I had with third campism, and I really could not make sense out of them. So I did try to resolve that cognitive dissonance in my head for a year, and I was unsuccessful. And I acknowledged my lack of success in June of 2023, and that is when I left third campism and returned gratefully to Maoism-Third Worldism under the leadership, for me, of Jason Unruh. Now, is Jason Unruh the founder of Maoism-Third Worldism? No, but he is the founder to me because he's the only Maoist-Third Worldist that I had contact with prior to becoming one. And I look up to him. I regard him as my mentor, as my chief mentor. Also, Red Pagan Nicole, a wonderful woman, a wonderful trans woman. I regard her as my mentor as well. So both of them, to me, are people I look up to. And I have learned, I guess maybe relearned, but no, learned is better. I have learned Maoism-Third Worldism correctly this time. So now I doubt. Doubt is not really a strong enough term. I am convinced that I will no longer ever leave Maoism-Third Worldism again. I learned from my mistake, and it was a bad one. The reason why I made that mistake is because I suddenly had this false hope that maybe the first world could have its own revolutions before the revolutionary process was initiated by the third world. I guess that was what you would call wishful thinking. It certainly was not based on reality. And when I look at the news today, or the news any day, and I just see what's happening, the US charged with war crimes, Israel now bombing another place and another place and another place, I don't have much faith that the first world will be around much longer. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there will be a first world, but in a very diminished capacity, under the control, sort of, I guess, maybe control is the wrong word, of the third world. Under the leadership, I guess, is better. Under the leadership of the third world. And that will be okay with me. But it would also be okay with me, even though I live right here in the United States, if the United States and the rest of the first world simply cease to exist. Even right now, as I am doing this podcast, if the first world stopped existing right now, I would be happy. I would be overjoyed. Well, I guess I couldn't be overjoyed because I wouldn't be around anymore to be overjoyed. Whatever. I wish that would happen. I wish that somebody would end the first world. We are the center of global imperialism. And imperialism is the major contradiction in capitalism. And we have used that imperialism to manipulate the third world. We have been doing that for a long time. We overthrew the legitimately elected government of Iran in 1953 and replaced him with Shah Pahlavi. Why? Because Shah Pahlavi was our puppet. We tried multiple times to assassinate Fidel Castro, and we failed each time gratefully. I liked Fidel Castro. I always liked Fidel Castro, even when I was a third campist. But I just kept that to myself, I suppose. But I liked Fidel Castro. And so regardless, I really don't admire the first world. I actually look down upon it. I look down upon the US. I definitely look down on Joseph Biden, although I'm not surprised by him because I knew who Joseph Biden was when he was running for president. I mean, Joseph Biden was one of the original Reagan Democrats. He's a war hawk. He's a neoconservative. He supports American imperialism. Neoconservatism, which describes no Biden, is simply another term for American imperialism. It's the same thing. Israel is like the little brother to the US. I recently read an article which said that if Israel did not exist, that the US would have to create it. And I think that's probably true. We use Israel. We use Israel. And the fact that Israel is a fascist, a truly fascist state. I mean, I would say that about the US as well, but compared to Israel, no, nothing is as fascist in the world today as Israel. At least not as far as I'm concerned. Israel's just starting wars left and right. And now we are starting a war with Yemen. And why? Because Yemen is attacking ships that are headed toward Israel because of Israel's war on Gaza. In other words, the Houthis in Yemen are right. They should be attacking the ships, or even better, the ships should not be going to Israel, which would avoid the attacks. But if ships want to go to Israel, I say fine, go ahead. So I'm on the side of the Houthis. I am always against the US. That may sound harsh. It is harsh, saying those kinds of things about my own country. And I wish I didn't feel that way because it's hard living in a country that you hate. But that is my situation. And that is why I can't see any other alternative except Maoism-Third Worldism, giving power to the third world, turning power over to the third world, the first world perhaps ceasing to exist, at least in its present form. So my going into third campism, again, I see as a serious mistake, as an error in judgment. I should not have made it. I made it because I had false hope that somehow revolutions could occur in the first world. I now realize that was a stupid thought. I never should have had it. I never should have left Maoism-Third Worldism, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for doing that. But you can't change the past. You can only try to make the future better for yourself and everyone else. For the time being, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.